This story is told by me from a father's perspective. The day Joan served me divorce papers, I was sitting in my truck outside our house, the house I'd spent 6 years paying a mortgage on, watching her move a man I'd never seen before up the front walk with a box of his things. She didn't even have the decency to wait. I didn't go inside, I just sat there with the engine off, my hands gripping the wheel, and I let the quiet settle over me. My lawyer called it a no-fault dissolution of assets. What that meant in plain English was that Joan got the house, the joint savings account, both cars, and primary custody of our 5-year-old son, Josh. I got a 2009 Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles on it and a check for $847. $847. That's what 12 years of my life was worth on paper. I didn't fight it. My attorney, a man named Culver Harrison, who wore golf shirts to court and charged $200 an hour, told me fighting would cost more than I could recover. The settlement was reasonable, he said, given the circumstances. I had no steady income. I'd been out of the army for 8 months, still doing contracting work that paid irregular. Joan's attorney had painted me as unstable and unpredictable, a man who couldn't be counted on. Maybe they were right about the money, but they were wrong about everything else. I slept in my truck for 4 nights, parked it behind a Walmart on Route 9 the first 2 nights, then in the lot of a church that never seemed to lock its gates. I ate fast food when I could afford it and skipped meals when I couldn't. I called Josh every evening at 6, and every evening Joan answered and told me he was busy or in the bath or already asleep. I hadn't seen my son in 11 days. On the 5th morning, I drove to a gas station to use the bathroom. I bought a sandwich that clearly was made the previous day and grabbed a lottery scratch tickets by the register. I don't know why I bought one. Desperation, maybe, or hope. My father used to buy them every Friday like clockwork, called it his weekly prayer. I handed the cashier $4, scratched the thing in the parking lot with the penny I found in the cup holder, and sat there for a very long time staring at it. 3 matching symbols, a jackpot line, a number with a lot of zeros behind it. I won the state lottery, $2,400,000. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. Then I called the Lottery Commission's hotline, confirmed what I was seeing, and they told me I needed to come to the state office in person with the ticket and my ID. The payout after taxes would be issued in approximately 7 to 10 business days. For someone in my position, that felt like an eternity. I had $838 left to my name and a winning lottery ticket I couldn't cash for a week, but none of that mattered. What mattered to me was that Josh would be okay. I could get a real attorney, fight for custody, and buy back some version of our life. I drove to the lottery office that same afternoon, signed the paperwork, handed over the ticket, and walked out with a receipt and a timeline, 7 to 10 days. The next morning, the story ran in the local paper. Local veteran wins lottery. They'd pulled my name from the public records the state was required to release. There was a photo, a stock image of the lottery logo, and 2 paragraphs about me. Former Army Ranger, recently divorced, wins $2.4 million, last known address listed as the parking lot of a Walmart on Route 9. I laughed out loud at that comment. I didn't list an address because my wife now legally owned our house, so I just mentioned I sleep in the parking lot of Walmart until I can sort things out. I remember reading the story on my phone and feeling something tighten in my chest. I felt quite exposed. I felt like a man who had just walked into the middle of a field and realized he was visible from every direction. Josh didn't come home from school the next day. I found out because I called the school at 3:45 p.m. I hadn't heard from Joan and she wasn't answering her phone. The secretary, a woman named Gigi, told me Joan had called to say she would be about an hour late and to keep Josh until she arrived. Gigi said she was waiting with Josh on the steps outside when the phone rang. She dashed in to answer, and when she came out, Josh wasn't there. I called Joan, but my message went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Then I drove to the house. Her car was gone, and so was the new man's truck. I knocked, but no one answered, so I walked around back. The yard was empty. Josh's little bicycle was still leaning against the fence, which meant wherever they'd gone, they planned to come back soon. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation, a family emergency on Joan's side, maybe a dentist appointment I hadn't been told about, or they went shopping. I drove back to the parking lot and sat in the dark, trying not to think about the thing that was starting to form at the back of my mind, the thing I didn't want to say out loud. The ransom note appeared under my windshield wiper sometime in the night. I found it at 6:14 a.m. when I woke up stiff in the front seat of my truck. My head was pounding and my back ached. A plain white sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper written in block letters. It said, "Your boy is safe. You want him back. You bring $1 million in cash. Midnight tomorrow. Pull off on County Road 7, past the grain elevator, half a mile in on the dirt path. Come alone. Tell no one. You call the police and you never see him again." I read it 3 times, then I sat very still. 12 years in the army, 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I'd been shot at in 4 countries, run 3 covert extraction operations, and survived a vehicle rollover that killed 2 of my teammates. I had sat with dying men and held their hands and kept my voice steady until they were gone. I thought I knew what fear felt like. I didn't know anything until I read that note. This was my son, my 5-year-old boy who still slept with a stuffed elephant named Pookie, and who made up songs while he ate breakfast. My first instinct was to comply, give them what they wanted, but I didn't have the money yet, and I won't have it for 7 to 10 business days. Even if I'd had it, $1 million in cash doesn't materialize from a bank account overnight, and I had less than $1,000 to my name. My second instinct was to call the FBI. The note had said not to, and if I told anyone, I'd never see Josh again. Every rational part of my brain said the note was a bluff, that kidnappers always say that the FBI had entire divisions trained for exactly this. But the irrational part, the father part, kept returning to one question. What if they meant it? What if this one time with this one child wasn't a bluff? I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, then I did what the note told me not to do. I made one call. Joe Bennett's picked up on the second ring. We'd served together for 6 years, Ranger Battalion, 75th Regiment, and Joe had a sixth sense for when someone was calling with something real. He didn't say hello, he said, "What happened?" I told him everything, the lottery win, the story, the ransom note, and Josh. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I loved about Joe. When I finished, there was a 4-second silence. "Give me 3 hours," he said. "Don't do anything." Joe Bennett wasn't just a former Army Ranger. He was also, as of 18 months ago, a federal special agent assigned to the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit out of the regional field office. He had taken the job specifically because of what we'd both seen overseas, children used as leverage. He told me once that working that unit was the hardest thing he'd ever done, and the only thing that felt worth doing. He was exactly the right person to call. He called me back in 2 hours and 40 minutes. "We have a problem and we have a solution," he said. "The problem is that they must have read about the lottery win and knew where you park. This isn't random. Someone in your orbit is connected to someone who did." I thought about Joan's new man, the truck I'd never seen before, the way she'd stopped answering my calls the moment the paper ran. "The solution," Joe continued, "is that we're already working it. I've got a team. We're going to do this right, but Neil, I need you to trust me completely and do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you." "Tell me," I said. What Joe laid out over the next hour was controlled and designed to look like exactly what the kidnappers expected, a terrified father attempting to comply. We would show up at the drop point, but not bring $1 million because we didn't have $1 million. We would bring something that looked like $1 million. A case filled with bundled paper with real bills on the outside, a standard FBI prop, and bring it with, surrounded by an invisible net of federal agents who had already spent 3 hours mapping the terrain on County Road 7. But first, Joe needed to know who was behind this, and he had a theory. "The note found you in a Walmart parking lot," he said. "That's not public information. Someone was watching you. The lottery story named the Walmart. Someone read it and either followed you or had already been watching. Given the timing, the note appears within 24 hours of publication. This was planned fast but not improvised. These people already knew about Josh. They knew the custody situation. They could have followed her when she dropped Josh off at school. They knew Joan had primary custody." He paused. "What do you know about the man Joan is seeing?" "His name was Derek Sauer. I knew that much because Josh had mentioned Mommy's friend Derek twice in phone calls. I knew he drove a black pickup. I knew he'd moved things into my house within days of the settlement. That's all I knew. Joe knew more within 40 minutes. Derek Sauer had 2 prior arrests, one for fraud and one for a theft charge that had been reduced to a misdemeanor. He had no current employment on record and had recently relocated from out of state. He had, in the past 18 months, been connected to 2 individuals currently under federal investigation for extortion. He's not a professional, Joe said. He's opportunistic. He saw the lottery story, saw an angle, and moved fast. That's actually good news. Professionals are harder to catch. I asked about Joan. Joe was quiet for a moment. We don't know yet how much she knew. Could be she's a victim in this too. Could be she's complicit. Either way, that's a separate conversation. I didn't say anything. I thought about the 12 years, about the house, and I thought about $838 and a parking lot. Focus on Josh, Joe said. Everything else comes after. The next 22 hours were the longest of my life. I went through the motions the kidnappers would expect. I drove around looking frantic because I was. I made no additional calls on my phone that they might be monitoring. I ate almost nothing. I sat in the truck and stared at the note until I had every word memorized. Then I stared at it some more. At 10 p.m., I received a text from an unknown number. It said, "Remember, alone," and a photo. It was Josh sitting on a blanket, holding a piece of paper with that day's date written on it. He looked scared but unharmed. His eyes were wide and he wasn't smiling, but he was breathing. I stared at that photo for a long time, then I drove to County Road 7. Joe had given me an earpiece that looked like a hearing aid, standard issue, completely invisible. There were 7 agents in the field before I arrived, 3 in the tree line, 2 in a vehicle parked a quarter-mile back on the main road, and Joe himself positioned behind a grain elevator outbuilding where he had a clean line of sight to the clearing. I parked where the note said, took the case from the back seat, and walked in on the dirt path. The clearing was dark, lit only by the thin edge of a crescent moon. I stood there for 6 minutes before headlights appeared. A black truck. It pulled in and stopped 20 feet away. 2 doors opened and 2 men got out. One of them was Derek Sauer. I recognized him from the photo Joe had sent me of his arrest record and the glimpse I got the day he moved his boxes into my house. The other was a man I didn't know, heavier with a shaved head and no jacket despite the cold. Sauer walked toward me. He looked nervous, which made him dangerous in a different way than a calm man would have been. His hand was in his jacket pocket. "Put the case down," he said. I put it down. "Step back." I stepped back. He moved forward and reached for the case. That was the moment Joe had told me to say the word. I said it loud enough for him to hear. Pookie, Josh's elephant. It meant nothing to anyone in that field except me and Joe. What followed took 11 seconds. I know because I counted later, going over the sequence in my mind. 3 agents emerged from the tree line. Joe came around the side of the grain elevator building. The 2 in the vehicle had already cut off the truck. Sauer dropped the case and reached for what was in his pocket, and then he was on the ground. The agent had his wrist behind his back and a knee between his shoulder blades. The second man ran 4 steps and then stopped because there was nowhere to go. Josh was on the back seat of the truck, child-locked, with a woman I didn't recognize. It wasn't Joan. The woman immediately put her hands up and started crying. Josh was wrapped in his jacket, and he had Pookie with him. They'd let him bring the elephant, and when the agent opened the door and said his name, he said, "I want my daddy." I was across the field in about 4 seconds. I held my son in that clearing for a long time while he cried. I didn't let him see that I did too. Joe stood back and gave us the space, which was one more reason he had always been the right person to call. Derek Sauer and his associate were arrested on federal kidnapping charges that night. The woman in the truck was Sauer's cousin, who had been present but claimed she hadn't understood the full scope of what was happening. The federal investigators took her claim seriously enough to charge her separately and deal with her case on its own terms. I didn't follow that part closely. I had other things to focus on. Joan. The investigation into Joan's involvement took 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks I spent in a borrowed apartment from a former army buddy named Ramirez, who hadn't asked a single question when I showed up with Josh and said I needed a place to stay. Josh slept on a pull-out sofa and called it an adventure. Kids are astonishing that way. The federal investigators ultimately determined that Joan had not known about the kidnapping in advance. She had known Sauer had a history. She'd known more than she admitted at first, but she hadn't been part of the plan. She had, in fact, been kept in the dark deliberately. Sauer hadn't trusted her not to panic. On that day, she had a hair appointment and had called the school to inform them she would be late and to keep Josh till she arrived. That finding was both a relief and its own kind of grief. It meant Joan wasn't a criminal. It meant she was something else, a woman who had brought a dangerous man into proximity with her child through carelessness or willfulness, or some combination of the two, and had not protected Josh the way a mother should. The courts would have something to say about that. My new attorney wasn't a man who wore golf shirts. Her name was Erica Landers. She had 22 years of family law experience and a reputation in the court system for being meticulous and relentless in equal measure. I hired her the week after the lottery payout was deposited into my account. She told me the case for modification of custody was strong. She said words like material change in circumstances and demonstrated risk to the child's safety. She said Josh's well-being was the court's primary concern. She was right. It took 4 months, but the custody arrangement was modified. Primary physical custody was granted to me. Joan retained visitation rights under supervised conditions for an initial period pending further review. She didn't contest it. In the end, I think something in her understood that contesting it would have cost her more than she had left to spend. I bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a big backyard and a fence, the kind of yard where a kid can ride a bike and a dog can run. I enrolled Josh in a new school. I hired a nanny for the hours when I was managing the contracting work I'd decided to keep, because I wasn't the type of man who could sit still, and because Joe had reminded me once that purpose matters more than comfort. On Josh's 6th birthday, I threw him a party with 11 kids from his new class and a chocolate cake shaped like an elephant. He named the cake Pookie too. He laughed until he hiccuped. He fell asleep on the lawn, and I carried him inside and laid him in his bed. I stood there watching him breathe for a while, the way you do when something has almost been taken from you and you need to remind yourself that it wasn't. Joe came to the party. He stood by the fence with a paper cup of juice and watched the kids run around and said almost nothing, which was exactly what Joe did when he was happy. Before he left, I told him I didn't know how to thank him. He shrugged. "You made the right call," he said. "You called the right person, and you trusted the process." That's all it was. I thought about that for a long time afterward, about what it means to trust a process when everything in you wants to break down the door yourself, about the restraint it takes to stand still when your child is in danger. I thought about the years of training and brotherhood, the shared hardship that meant I had someone to call, someone who picked up on the second ring and didn't say hello, just what happened. Not everyone has that, I know that. I'm aware in a way I wasn't before of how much it matters. The money changed things the way money always does, but it didn't change what I had learned in that parking lot, eating cold food and reading a ransom note in the gray morning light. It didn't change what I'd learned on those 4 nights in my truck, or in the years before that, in countries where the stakes were different, but the math was the same. Stay calm, know who you trust, make one good decision at a time. That's all any of us can do. Derek Sauer was convicted on federal kidnapping charges and sentenced to 19 years. His associate received 14. They weren't the kind of men who had thought carefully about consequences. They had seen a number in a newspaper and reached for it and found out that some things you reach for will take your whole arm off. I still drive the F-150. I had the engine rebuilt and the rust treated. I put new tires on it. It's got nearly 180,000 miles on it now, and it still runs like a dream. Josh calls it the tank. He thinks that's funny. I do too. Some things you hold on to, some things you let go. You learn over time which is which, and when the world tries to take what matters most, you pick up the phone and you call the one person who answers. If this story resonated with you, then this message is for you. The bravest thing you can do in a crisis is not go it alone. It's knowing who to trust and trusting them completely. Neil didn't have $1 million. He made one right phone call, and that was enough. Who in your life would pick up on the second ring? Drop their name in the comments. And if this kind of story hits different for you, make sure you hit subscribe, because Story Junkie is where we tell the truths that keep you up at night and remind you what it means to fight for the people you love. This is a Story Junkie original. Stay safe and God bless.